50th anniversary of the Allman Brothers Band. And if you're a fan as much as I'm a fan, you're going to love this hour. We are incredibly fortunate to have Sidney Smith right here from New Orleans, who ended up being the official, unofficial photographer of the Allman Brothers. He comes out with a pictorial book, the most incredible pictures of all of the band members of the Allman Brothers. I have looked through it 3 times already, and I'm sure I will look through it another 30 because I pick up something every time I look at it. You definitely want to see this. The name of the book is called A Photographic Memoir of the Early Years of the Allman Brothers Band from the Archives in New Orleans, lensman Sidney Smith. It starts with Dwayne, and it ends with Greg.
That's
Sidney,
it.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Newell. Thank you.
It's so good to visit with you. I had heard of you, had never met you, and it's kind of interesting. And then as the more I look through the book and the story and the background, the Allman Brothers, one of my favorites.
Right.
And this was a band that started out and it really had trouble figuring out their identity. And
I'd say that's
and
fair.
you got into this situation with them. How? Tell us that story.
Well, I was only 16 years old. In fact, if you've ever seen that movie Almost Famous, came out maybe 20 years ago, that was really my story. I mean, it was actually about a guy named Cameron Crowe, who was a rock and roll writer, a young 15, 16-year-old rock and roll writer writing for Rolling Stone. But I was a 16-year-old rock and roll photographer, and I went one night in November of 1970 and crashed the Tulane University homecoming dance to see this band, the Allman Brothers. And, they'd been making waves around the South, and they'd played in New Orleans at the Warehouse on a few occasions prior to that. So I walked in, and I was blown away by what I watched and saw, and I met the band, and I took some pictures. And, back in those days, cameras and film and processing were very expensive, so I just took a few pictures, but those pictures still stand today as very iconic images of the band in the early days. But I continued on with them. I had no idea at the time that meeting would last 5 decades, and I'd be still in the Allman Brothers family, 50 years later.
Yeah, I mean, when you reminded me this is the 50th anniversary of the band, it kind of took a little bit of my breath away because it always seems so current, no matter when I play the song, no matter how. The band was, as I said before, it kind of struggled at first, with Dwayne and Greg. It started with Dwayne, and obviously, and they seemed to have difficulty finding their identity. They had a couple of releases.
They did
mediocre at first.
Right. Well, Dwayne was the guitar genius behind the band. I mean, he put the group together in 1969, and unfortunately Dwayne was killed in a motorcycle accident tragically in October of 1971 before he got to see the massive success that the band achieved. In fact, that I often tell people that night at Tulane, they were playing in a room not much larger than what we're sitting in right now,
right.
And just 2 or 3 years later, they were playing in front of 600,000 people at Watkins Glen, New York, the largest rock crowd ever assembled for a concert, still to this day. And 2 years after that, they opened up the Superdome here in New Orleans in 1975. But you're right, the band came from different musical backgrounds, and they were a little bit at first struggling. That you had Dwayne and Greg coming from a rhythm and blues, rock and roll thing, and you had Barry Oakley, the original bass player, from a jazz background, and you had J-Mo, one of the drummers from a soul background, and he used to play with Otis Redding. You had Butch Trucks, the other drummer, from a classical background. Dickie Betts was pure country western.
Yep.
And it all meshed together and created one massively amazing unit.
And in many respects, all very unique individuals.
Oh, very much so.
Some a little crazier than others.
I would say so. Yeah, Dickie goes. They all had their issues for sure, and at first they were just touring relentlessly from one side of the country to the other. I mean, they'd be booked in New York one day and in California the next, and they weren't flying; they were driving back and forth. I mean, they were, and then when they got to a city like New Orleans, they'd they play the warehouse until the wee hours of the morning. Then they go back to the hotel and play in the bar at the hotel. Then they come out and play for free at the park the next day. It was nonstop. They just loved what they were doing.
Is it fair to characterize them as one of the last great jam session bands? Because it seems a lot of their live album work was just that, jam sessions.
It was a long jam. Jam bands today are not what the Allman Brothers were. I mean, there's a jam band crowd, but that jam bands don't have the same meaning as when we were young and we went to a concert and we watched a band play and play and play for hours. That was jamming. When you'd have members of the band with other members. Like I remember one night, Fleetwood Mac and the Allman Brothers jammed together. The Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers jammed together. These were historic moments.
Actually, I've heard tell of many stories that there was a special something between Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers.
Oh, there was. Yeah, there was. Well, the Grateful Dead, got about a 5-year start on the Allman Brothers. They both got busted in New Orleans.
Yeah,
that's one thing.
That's one thing they had in common.
Busted down on Bourbon Street. Yeah. But
they're not the only ones.
Yeah. But they do share that. But they were a lot alike. The Allman Brothers were, I think, a much better band than the Grateful Dead, but somehow the Grateful Dead has that, the Deadheads follow them around all over the place. But the Allman Brothers and the Grateful Dead did jam a lot together. In fact, there is one amusing story that I can tell you. It was New Year's Eve, 1973, December 31st. 1973, and the Allman Brothers Band was playing at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. It was a major concert. It was broadcast all across the country. I was flown out there to shoot the band at the concert, and backstage, the Grateful Dead showed up. Unannounced, and they were tripping on LSD, on acid, and they decided that the Allman Brothers should share in the experience without letting the Allman Brothers know. And the Allman Brothers hit the stage without realizing they had been dosed by the Grateful Dead. And Dickie Betts told me later that the neck of his guitar started getting longer and longer and longer. Butch Trucks told me that his drumsticks started turning into rubber. Long story short, this massively important concert ended up with the Grateful Dead being on stage more than the Allman Brothers that night. So, but
that's one way to steal a show, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. It was, but the book is a labor of love on my part. I mean, I've had these pictures for decades, and lots of rock and roll photo books have come out, but I was pressured into putting this out by tons of people because I have pictures that nobody else has. I mean, on stage, off stage, I've got candid shots. I've got the poker games. I've got the wives and the kids. I've got them on the farm.
Some very private moments.
Oh, very private moments.
With their young children and
absolutely.
Their wives
I've got the
stuff.
kids.
I mean,
I've got
just
them.
some really incredible work here.
Yeah, backstage, hotel rooms, picnics, volleyball games, at home with the wives and the kids, in the studio. It's all there.
You even have a rare shot of Bob Dylan in this book.
That was a funny moment. Yeah, not so funny for me, but it was. I was sitting with Dickie Betts. I was sitting with the Allman Brothers at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opening in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1995. And I was sitting at a table talking to Dickie Betts, and Bob Dylan plops himself down to talk to Dickie Betts, and it's right across the table from me. And I think, oh my God, what a great shot! I've got two iconic, musicians in front of me. So I raised my camera, shot the picture. You would have thought I had thrown battery acid on Dylan. He just freaked out, didn't want anything to do with photographers or anything like that. I mean, little did I know. I mean, hey. Right. And Dickie was saying, oh, it's okay. That's Sidney. He's our friend. And said, oh, no. So I got up and moved away. I didn't want, but I got the iconic picture, and it's in the book.
It's in the book, absolutely, with many others. We got to be right back. If you got a question for Sidney, 260-1870 or text 870-870. Trust me when I tell you, if you are an Allman Brothers fan, you want to get a hold of this book. I mean, just iconic moments captured in such a beautiful way here. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're visiting with Sidney Smith, the author and photographer. He's put out a book on the 50th anniversary of the Allman Brothers Band called 70 to 74 plus a little more. It's a photographic memoir on the early years of the Allman Brothers Band. It all started with Dwayne and it ended with Greg. We talked earlier about this connection that they had with the Grateful Dead, and I was asking you off air, other than the Grateful Dead, I couldn't remember of another band that had two drummers, because they had two drummers in the Allman Brothers Band, and then you reminded me immediately of James Brown.
Right. James Brown had two drummers. In fact, that's where Duane Allman got the idea for two drummers. He said, if James Brown can have two drummers, damn it, I can have two drummers.
And two drummers he did.
And he had two amazing drummers. I mean, Butch Trucks and J-Mo, the two drummers.
J-Mo was phenomenal.
They were both phenomenal. That honestly impressed me more when I first saw the band than Duane's guitar playing. The fact that these two drummers were so in sync with each other, I mean, it was unbelievable. And then you had Dickie Betts and Duane Allman so in sync with each other. It was just an amazing.
And they all came from different
musical
types of
backgrounds.
music.
Absolutely.
Genre. They played different genres of music, which very much revealed itself in the songs that they collaborated and wrote together and composed. And it was funny. We really weren't back into video those days. And when you look at some of the old video, I was a drummer.
Yeah.
So it always piqued my curiosity as to the two rhythms, separate rhythms that were being generated.
Yeah.
One being on the cymbals as opposed to the other actually being on the skins, right? And it was amazing how they interacted with one another.
Oh, it was incredible. And in fact, Butch Trucks was playing timpani and all the their songs. I can't. Dickie Betts was pure country western. In fact, the song "Ramblin' Man" was a massive hit for the Allman Brothers.
He composed that, actually.
Dickie Betts wrote that, and ironically, he ended up leaving the band in 2000. He was kind of pressured out of the band.
You made an observation earlier that Duane never really did get to see the pinnacle of the band.
Absolutely correct. Duane died in 71.
In 71, a lot of the songs on the Eat a Peach album were actually he's on and was composed.
Right.
He had a real strong influence on that album. It wasn't released until I think in 72.
Yeah.
As
after
I recall,
he died.
after he died.
Yeah.
And there was probably a strong synergy between the fact of a lot of people really grieving his death and then that album coming out and having him present on it. And, I mean, that album just took off. I remember it to this day. I think I was a freshman in high school when it came out, and I can still remember.
Well, people ask me every now and then what do I think is the best album. Without a doubt, Live at Fillmore East still stands today as the best live album of any band. And the Allman Brothers, that's when they really took off. And unfortunately, Duane had just died. And then Eat a Peach, and then the album Brothers and Sisters.
Brothers and Sisters, yeah.
And that just put them on top of the world. And they were really, in the mid-'70s, they were the best band, the most popular band in America. Yeah. Hands down, I mean, you had Led Zeppelin, you had Elton John, all that. But the Allman Brothers Band, without a doubt, were the most popular band. And like I said earlier, they played in front of 600,000 people at Watkins Glen, New York, and only with the Grateful Dead along with them and the band. That's it. And
it's interesting. You did a lot of work at the Warehouse as well.
Yes, indeed.
And when we talked the other day, you made this observation, and it kind of stimulated, some very fond memories for me. The Allman Brothers played so frequently at the Warehouse; they were almost the house band.
They were considered to be the official, unofficial house band. Like I was the official, unofficial photographer for the Warehouse. But
there was a lot of official, unofficial stuff going on.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, exactly. But the band played all the time. The New Orleans crowd loved the Warehouse. I mean, loved the band, the Allman Brothers. The Allman Brothers loved the Warehouse and the New Orleans crowd. It was a great union. They did experience unfortunate happenstance in July of 1972 after they came back from playing a concert at City Park Stadium. The NOPD was waiting for them back at the hotel. But the band has had a lot of ups and downs along the way. So.
Yeah, I kind of remember a concert. I think it was right after that concert where Susie Quatro opened for Eric Clapton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think it was 461 Ocean Boulevard was the new release that he had.
Yeah, and Eric Clapton and Duane Allman were great.
That's
friends.
why I'm going there, because I understand that they were very close friends.
Duane Allman worshipped Eric Clapton, and Clapton had been around for several years before the Allman Brothers, and Tom Dowd, who was the producer for both the Allman Brothers and Eric Clapton, was working on an album with Eric Clapton, which turned out to be Layla, Derek and the Dominoes. And the Allman Brothers were playing in Miami that night. And Dowd said, Eric, would you like to see the Allman Brothers? And he says, is that Dwayne Allman guy, really? Is that Dwayne Allman? And he said, yeah. So Clapton and the Derek and the Dominoes crew sits down in front of the pit, in front of the stage, without the Allman Brothers knowing they were coming. Dwayne Allman's in the middle of playing, and he sees Eric Clapton in the front, right there in the front, staring at him, and he just stops playing for a second, turns around the rest of the band, and continues. And then after the concert, the Allman Brothers band went over to the studio, jammed with the Derek and the Dominoes, and so began the relationship with Eric and Dwayne. Dwayne ended up playing slide on Layla, and a lot of that guitar work on Layla is not Eric Clapton, it's Dwayne Allman.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I did not know
including
that.
the little bird chirping at the end. That's Dwayne.
That's
Dwayne, yeah. Dwayne was considered to be the best slide guitarist, hands down. And ironically, when Eric Clapton was looking for a slide guitarist a few years back to join him on the road, he went to the Allman Brothers band and got Derek Trucks, who many people think is the reincarnation of Dwayne Allman as far as his playing goes.
Absolutely. Similar style.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it. It's funny, all of these little tidbits and these paths that cross, and many of them, you say, they crossed right here in this city.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier that the Allman Brothers got busted here in New Orleans, but associated with that bust, the cops that came in their hotel rooms that night were dressed in plain clothes. So Dickie Betts, who could fight as well as he can play guitar, knows kung fu and karate and all that stuff.
He was like black belt in something.
Exactly. Right? Well, he put up a fight because they didn't identify themselves.
We'll pick up the story there. Stay with us. We're talking about the Allman Brothers, 50th anniversary of the band, and this great book, 70 to 74, plus a little more. We'll be right back with the author, Sidney Lee. Stay with us. We're back. We're talking to Sidney Smith, the photographer and author of this book, 70 to 74, plus a little more, about the Allman Brothers band. You know what I really like about the book? It's just not pictures. You got testimonials there. You put the picture in the context of the year, the moment, the why, the what, which is really, it tells a story.
That's very important, actually, because a lot of photo books don't do that. They just throw the pictures out there. They don't really even give a lot of thought into what photos they're throwing. I've given this book a lot of thought. I mean,
it's obvious.
I spent a lot of time. This was a labor of love. I picked the pictures that I thought were most poignant, and I've got descriptions under every photo in the book of what was going on. I got little stories in the book, cute tidbits.
Absolutely. And if you want to get this book and enjoy it as much as I have, you can get it at www.allmanbrothersbook by Sidney Smith. That's SIDNEYSMITH.com.
Allman Brothers Book by SidneySmith.com.
Absolutely.
It's also locally available currently at the New Orleans Historic New Orleans Collection downtown in the French Quarter. It's also available on Amazon, but of course I prefer if you get it directly from.
Absolutely. Let's go to Tommy on line one. What say you, Tommy?
Good morning, guys. Good afternoon, actually. Newell, I want to thank you for your show. You are a rare, reasonable voice in today's media. I do appreciate that. And Sidney, I want to thank you. I'm somebody who saw the Allman Brothers at the Warehouse way back when, and just have been a fan ever since and before that. And just want a couple of things. The Warehouse itself, I got to give a shout out to John Dubois. You must know John, who actually made a lot of recordings, and there are some recordings online of the Allman Brothers playing at the Warehouse and many other people, thanks to John Dubois and people like that. But and also Dickie Betts' son and Greg Allman's son have a band called the Allman Betts Band, and also Barry Oakley's, I think it's his son, is in that band also. I don't know if you're aware of that.
We're very, very much aware of that. In fact, Allman Betts Band is playing here, given Devin's health, because he just had an operation.
Right.
Given Devin's health, the Allman Betts Band is playing here on October 19th. That's a Saturday night at the Blues and Barbecue Festival. I believe that's in Lafayette Square, and they're the headline band. And I got to tell you, I just came from seeing them at the Peach Festival, and they are spot on. I mean, they're damn good.
I mean, and he looks just well. You could tell he's an Allman. There's no getting around that.
Oh yeah. I mean,
amazing. I just wanted to thank you guys. I've got all kind of stories to tell too, but I mean that's your job right now. But I'm sure there are a bunch of stories you could tell about the road crew.
oh yeah, well,
They were just as infamous as the guys themselves in some capacity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tommy, for calling.
that's actually a good point. The road crew, because one of the things I did in the very early days, which is something that no photographer that I can think of ever thought to do. As a young kid, I took pictures of the road crew doing their job. Nobody took pictures of the road crew. I took pictures of the road crew.
You were curious.
Yeah, I was curious. I really was kind of intrigued by this whole group of guys, and I took pictures of the road crew. And then I developed the pictures, print the pictures, show them the pictures, and the road crew would look at me and say, "You took pictures of us? Man, all right, thank you." And hey, you know what? If you make friends with the road crew, you don't get thrown off the stage.
Right.
And in rock and roll world, you get thrown off of a lot of stages. But,
Absolutely.
I was great friends with them.
This is a band had a lot of tragedy.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, there was a black cloud over that band in the early days. I mean, first you had Dwayne Allman die tragically in a motorcycle accident in October of '71 before the band even truly got off the ground. Then a year later, you had Barry Oakley, the bassist, die, and he and Dwayne were real close. And after Dwayne died, Barry just was on a downward slant, and unfortunately, he just couldn't pull himself out of it. And I noticed this. I watched it happening, and I could tell something was going to go down. And unfortunately, it did. A year later, Barry was also killed in a motorcycle accident 2 blocks away from where Dwayne was killed.
So almost the same way.
Yeah,
I mean, freakish when you think about it.
Exactly. And then, after that, they replaced Barry with Lamar Williams on bass, and Lamar Williams died a few years later of Agent Orange, which he contracted, I believe, in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And, in more recent years, Butch Trucks unfortunately committed suicide a few years ago. Greg Allman passed on. And now you've got Dickie Betts and J-Mo, the two original, of the original 6, the 2 lasting guys.
Absolutely. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about, there was some controversy, too, with Greg Allman and Cher's relationship and what that actually meant, which was kind of unique in many ways. We'll be right back.
All right.
Nothing better than sitting under the sun, maybe on the beach, listening to a little Allman Brothers. If that doesn't relax you, if that doesn't create the smooth mood, nothing will, right?
That's right.
So they have this controversial relationship. Greg Allman, Cher, come from 2 different walks of life.
2 different worlds.
2
entirely.
different worlds, 2 different fan bases. She goes through a little bit of the wild side in her life after
Sonny.
After Sonny, and Greg was was the rebel, I guess, in many respects, and not too many people, as I recall, were really into that gig.
No, they released a couple of albums together, which tanked, I think. But Greg had his fan base, Cher had her fan base, and the 2 fan bases like, what? What? Why is Greg Allman hooking up with Cher? Why is Cher hooking up with that Greg Allman guy? So they went through some challenges there. They produced a child, Elijah Blue, who is now, I guess in his 40s. He was born in '75, I think. But that was an interesting period of time,
And actually, it created a lot of friction in the band, if my memory serves me
I don't know if Cher
correct.
created the friction as much as some other things that went down involving drugs.
But it was during that same period of time.
Yeah, it was during the same period of time. And actually, Dickie Betts ended up marrying Cher's secretary.
Yeah.
And that's where his son Dwayne came from, that union. But when I knew them way back when, it was when Sandy Blue Sky, as in the song Blue Sky, when she was married to Dickie, and I shot their wedding photos back in '73. And that was a great wedding.
Let's go to Bobby out in Mandeville on line 1. What say you, Bobby?
How you doing?
How are you?
I'm doing fine. A buddy of mine told me y'all were on the radio speaking about the warehouse.
Absolutely.
Let everybody know that we're going to be doing a tribute to the warehouse real soon on the neutral ground across the street from Mardi Gras World at Chapatulas and Race. And we're going to be using a lot of Sidney's photos, vintage photos that he took back in the day of Oda Who, Joe Cocker, and
Everybody.
We were just talking about Procol Harum off.
Yeah, Newell's a big Procol Harum fan, and I shot Procol Harum along with Allman Brothers and everybody else at the warehouse.
Yeah, so just wanted to thank Sidney for finally coming out with that book. We all appreciate it. Let you know I'm going to be dropping by for my personalized autographed copy from you.
I'll be happy to give it to you.
I'm a proud owner of one now, and I got to say, when you look at the quality of this book, you would expect to pay twice, if not three times the price. You're priced at $39.95. You can't get books of this quality for that price. I'm gonna tell you, that's a deal.
I've been telling people they ought to buy two books, one for their bookshelf and the other one cut out the pictures and frame them for their walls.
Because most of the pictures are 8x10s.
Most of them are 8x10s and the highest of quality. I mean, the photos are incredible. It's from the first page to the last. I mean, it's evident that I put my heart and soul into this. It's a fine document.
No, it is, and you're not boasting because it is.
Thank you.
It is.
Yeah.
As I said, I've already been through it in one day 3 times, just looking at the pictures, and all of these pictures, they always bring back memories. Of times where you've actually seen the band perform.
Sure. It brings you back to the early 70s.
Of the times when I was driving around in my 1974 Mercury Capri with a stick shift and had my 8-track mounted in the middle, which is as big as my iPad. But it just it brings back these memories.
Well, but more so, it brings you into their private world. I mean, pictures of them on the farm, pictures of them at their house with their kids, with the wives, pictures of them with their poker games, their volleyball games. It's the title of the book is 70 through 74 plus a little bit more, but that little bit more actually goes all the way up to 2019 because I have in the book the Allman Betts Band, Greg's son and Dickie's son and Barry Oakley's son, who are now in a band together, the Allman Betts Band, carrying on the torch, and the road goes on forever.
And it's funny. They still have a huge fan base.
Oh, yeah. After 50 years. They never, the Allman Brothers Band, and very similar to the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers Band have never wavered in their fan base. 5 decades, the fan base is strong as it ever was. They're just an amazing band. They were the band.
All right. Give us a call, 260-1870. Bobby, thank you so much for calling in, or text 870-870. We'll be right back. We're back, and we're talking to Sidney Smith. And if you want a copy of this book, you can get it at www.allmanbrothersbooks.com.
Not Allman Brothers Books, Allman Brothers Book by SidneySmith.com.
Oh, book. I'm sorry. That's right. Book by Sidney.com. Sorry. Little dyslexia going on there. There was, when I first opened the book, when you and I were together, and I opened it to this page 34, and it had a picture of Greg Allman with his first wife.
His wife, Shelley, who is the mother of Devin.
His wife, Shelley, and I said to you then, I said to you again, I did not remember Shelley.
Oh, there were like 8 wives.
Because I even asked you, I said, who is this?
Yeah. Oh, well, the reason I put that particular shot in the book is because it's the only picture in existence on the planet of Greg and Shelley together. And the reason I know that is because Devin, his son, told me that. After Greg died, Devin called me and said, do you have any pictures of my parents together? And I said, as a matter of fact, I do. And he says, well, you're the only person on the planet that does then. I'd love to get a copy of it. Well, several months later, Devin was playing on a Rock Legends cruise that I happened to be on. And in advance of me going there, I framed the picture, matted the picture, and put it real nice, and waited for the fans to leave. There was a meet and greet going on. And after the last person said hello to Devin, I approached him with the picture, and he thought I was just another fan. And he said, hi, I'm Devin. I said, hi, I'm Sidney Smith, and here's your picture. And it was a moment. It was a real good moment.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of other pictures in here of just these personal moments and personal touches that are very, very interesting and really tells a story about kind of the back life of the band.
It's a backstage pass into the Allman Brothers band world. It really is. And And that's what I've tried to do with this, and including the photos, the stories, the tidbits of information. I've tried to make the reader feel that they're a complete part of the whole deal, and I think I did.
Now, getting a lot of texts and people asking as to whether or not you signed a book. If they ordered a book,
if they order the book, I will sign it. Once again, www.allmanbrothersbookbysidneysmith.com. I sign all copies of the book. The book can also be found on Amazon. Of course, I prefer it. They order it from me directly. And it can be found locally at the Historic New Orleans Collection in the French Quarter. But it's a phenomenal book. And if anybody's out there with a bookstore that wants to do a book signing, I'm happy to do that too. Call me.
You know, Sidney, there's probably 50 hours of stories, if not more. And I just want to thank you for the 1 hour that you agreed to stay here with me. Right away when I told you that I was a huge Allman Brothers Band fan, you know, it was like, well, let's talk. And I said, well, why don't you come on the show? And, and we are very appreciative that you allowed me this 1 hour. I can tell you it's brought back a lot of fond memories of my childhood because I was a big rock and roller, and I love it, and that's all I listen to today. Yeah. My wife listens to something else. She gets in the car and gets totally aggravated because that stereo in the car is cranked up. Because I can only listen to it at one volume, and that's loud.
Well, today we'll talk about the Allman Brothers. Tomorrow, the Rolling Stones.
Right. And you have a little connection with Paul McCartney as well.
I've worked with Paul.
Shot a lot of photos of Paul McCartney too.
Oh yeah, I worked with Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, Rod Stewart. In fact, I worked with ZZ Top before they grew their beard, so you can that gives you an idea.
I think I saw them the first time at East Jeff High School Stadium. I mean, there's a picture of the Allman Brothers playing at what you mentioned, the Tulane University homecoming. They got pictures in this book. I mean, phenomenal.
The early days.
You can't even imagine.
That's actually the first night I met the Allman Brothers, as I said earlier. And one cute little tidbit of information: Barry Oakley offered me what I thought was illegal drugs at the time, which it was only snuff. He was like it was tobacco.
Right.
And I was a 15, 16-year-old kid, and no, I never touched the stuff. He looks at me and says, "It's only snuff."
Well, guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this hour as much as I did. The first hour I had the coaches of the Little League World Series, world champions. What a nice experience that was. This was a great experience too, Sidney. Thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime.
And best of luck with the book.
Thank you.
Once again, www.allmanbrothersbook.by sidneysmith.com, and he'll sign that for you. And so this was a great day. Really enjoyed it.